Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know, Democrats have spent decades weaponizing race to rig the electoral map in their favor. They carve out these incredibly bizarre-shaped districts that seem based solely on skin color. They, of course, call it representation. Ooh, my representation, we love a good leftist buzzword. But you know what I think the rest of us call it? You know, us adults who can see and think and hear? We call it race-based gerrymandering. In other words, we call it racist. And well, now it seems as though this Democrat practice might be in big trouble. It might be out the window, as the Supreme Court is now hearing a case as to whether or not this violates the 14th Amendment. In other words, depending on what they decide, this corrupt little Democrat race racket might be coming to a halting end. And of course, you can imagine the left is in full panic mode. They're melting down, because without these hand-carved racial districts, well, they're going to lose the one advantage that's been artificially inflating their House numbers for years. And they, of course, want to tell you it's a civil rights issue, it must be stopped, but obviously it's an issue about political power. Obviously, it's a story about Democrats exploiting race for their own political benefit, for their party's ambitions, and well, it might just be illegal, it might be unconstitutional. Let me show you guys exactly what's going on and why Democrats are panicking like you cannot imagine. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so the Supreme Court just signaled a potentially seismic shift in redistricting law in a Louisiana case that stems from the same logic used to force Alabama to create a second majority black district. The court is now asking whether the intentional creation of racial districts might violate the Constitution itself, specifically the 14th and 15th Amendment. And this is a massive development because if the court rules that drawing lines based on race is unconstitutional, even under the guise of the Voting Rights Act, well, it's going to blow a gaping hole through the entire Democrat election strategy. You know, the reality is the left's entire redistricting model heavily relies on race. I know they're always talking about the dangers of gerrymandering, but as we've been pointing out recently, they are the CEOs of frickin' gerrymandering. They've been doing it for decades. They gerrymander districts based on racial data, essentially creating these little artificial Democrat strongholds. Then, of course, if anybody challenges their practices, they cry racism. Ooh, you're a racist, trying to take away electoral representation from black people. That's the playbook. But now the courts are asking, maybe, you know, we've got it twisted. Maybe we've got it backwards. Maybe it's racist to be separating people on skin color to begin with. And it might be unconstitutional to create districts where the defining feature isn't ideology or community, but rather race. In places like Alabama, Louisiana, and even parts of Texas, you've got districts that were drawn explicitly under the idea that black voters must be grouped together to, quote, empower them. And obviously there's a little element of soft bigotry there that nobody wants to talk about. The idea that black Americans all vote the same, that they all need to be grouped up in a political monolith, and this idea that their political strength only comes from being racially segregated and voting Democrat for decades on decades on decades, well, it's just a ridiculous notion. Call me crazy, but wouldn't you call that racial segregation? Isn't that the kind of thing that the left is constantly fighting against? And that's the irony of this situation. We've got Jasmine Crockett, who now clearly stands to lose as her racially segregated district is now being redrawn in Texas. And of course, here she is, front and center, screeching about racism.
This is just pure math. Like, I'm not trying to pick who is going to vote for who, because as it was stated earlier, the idea that anybody is a monolith is wild anyway, right? Because first of all, Latinos down at the border, they are not the same as Latinos, say, in the DFW or in Harris County. Like, so I don't want to pretend as if any minority group is a monolith, which is one of the reasons that we talk about communities of common interest, because we work together and we function together and we do things a little differently. I mean, I'm sure there are even black folk in Houston that will argue that they're not the same as Dallas black people, right? So it's an ongoing thing. But nevertheless, what I will say is that is why you shouldn't just be grabbing up people from wherever and saying, oh, well, they all the same race. It is bigger than that. It is trying to make sure, and you brought up compactness earlier. And so compactness is one of those things that you consider as well, because again, it is different. When you look at a state the size of Texas, you know how many states you can fit in our state, right? So thinking about it in that way, a reflective map would look like the fact that only 39% of this state is Anglo. So how in the heck do we have 60% of the seats that go to DC are going to be decided by Anglos? That's the math that doesn't work. We need to flip the numbers so that people of color, no matter who they vote for, if they decide they're voting for Trump, and you're right, because of the 13 democratically elected seats in the state of Texas, one of those seats was a majority white seat. Everybody else, it was people of color that sent us to DC. But when we look at the Republicans, of the 25 seats, 23 of those seats are Anglo majority seats. 2 of those seats, Latinos are the ones that chose. And I don't have a beef with that. Like, that's who they elected, and that is perfectly fine. So they have 2 Anglo seats that are Republican. 2 Latino opportunity seats that elected Republicans. That is perfectly fine. People vote for who they vote for, but don't divide our communities and dilute our voices. And that's why we're here. Because we feel like we're being diluted, because we're packing black folk, or the bill author mentioned that there's some district that went up to over 70-something% Latino. That is packing. You don't need almost 80% Latinos for that district to perform as a Latino opportunity seat.
It's racist, she says, while literally arguing to draw districts based on race. There's too many Anglos. We need to draw the districts in a way that segregates people. Unironically demanding race-based segregation as some sort of civil rights victory. It's complete nonsense, and it's no solution to any problem. No, it is the problem. It's going backwards. I thought the whole concept was you're not black, you're not Asian, you're not white, you're not Latino or Mexican or Guatemalan. You're supposed to be American. And in that sense, there should be no differentiation based on identity. Districts should be drawn logically rather than explicit segregation. And listen, just thinking about it, I think there's a good chance that SCOTUS strikes this practice down, just like they did with race-based hiring and student admissions. A final ruling is expected in June of 2026, which is right in time for the midterms. And if the ruling goes the way that it's looking, here's where it looks really bad for the Democrats, as initial calculations suggest that they could lose up to 25 seats in the House. And you may be asking, well, why? How could that be? Well, it's very simply because many of those seats exist only because of racial gerrymandering. And when you remove that crutch, well, suddenly Democrats have to actually compete in real districts. No more race-designed Democrat monopolies. It may be completely game over in 2026 because that ruling gives states enough time to actually redraw their maps. They might be forced to ahead of the election. But as per usual, Democrats love to scream about fairness, about democracy, about representation. But as you can see, there's a clear pattern here. Their entire electoral strategy, well, it's racist. It's all about playing identity politics and pandering to particular groups, and that's not democracy. In fact, I'd argue it's corruption. And now, the little identity politics, racist house of cards that the Democrat built, it might be tumbling down. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.